In 1871, a well-dressed woman walked into Maynard's confectionery shop in Brighton, England. She smiled, handed over a few coins, and walked out with a box of chocolate creams. No one knew that within days, these chocolates would turn deadly, all because this woman couldn't take no for an answer. Born into privilege, Christiana Edmunds seemed destined for a comfortable life. But beneath the surface, her family was haunted by mental illness. Her father's mind unraveled before his early death, her brother died in an asylum, and her sister took her own life. By her 20s, Christiana herself was diagnosed with hysteria, a vague Victorian catch-all for women who didn't conform. By the 1860s, Christiana, her widowed mother, and her remaining sister had moved to Brighton, a bustling seaside town known for its genteel society and leisurely lifestyle. But life as a middle-class woman in Victorian England was restrictive, and Christiana felt unfulfilled, perhaps even bored. That was until she met Dr. Charles Beard. Dr. Beard was a local physician who lived almost directly opposite Christiana at 64 Grand Parade. He was happily married, but that didn't stop Christiana from developing an all-consuming obsession with him. Against Mr. Beard's better judgment, the two began exchanging flirtatious letters with each other. Beard was flattered, but never fully invested in the relationship. But to her, the connection was undeniable, and she believed wholeheartedly that her feelings were fully reciprocated. When he realized Christiana's feelings were spiraling into obsession, he put an end to their correspondence. But Christiana did not take rejection well. In her mind, there was only one obstacle standing between them: Mrs. Emily Beard. In September of 1870, Christiana put her plan into action. She casually walked into Maynard's confectionery shop and purchased a box of his finest chocolate creams. Then, on her way back home, she popped in to see the local chemist, Isaac Garrett. "I have a stray cat problem at my house," she stated. "What do you have that could help me take care of this problem?" Isaac suggested strychnine and sold her a small bottle of it, unknowingly handing Christiana the very thing that would send the small town into panic and grief. The next day, she presented Mrs. Beard with a seemingly innocent gift, a box of chocolate creams. But these weren't just sweets, they were laced with the strychnine, a poison known for causing violent convulsions and an agonizing death. Dr. Beard, being a physician, recognized that his wife's symptoms closely resembled poisoning, and he immediately suspected Christiana. But with no solid evidence and a desire to avoid a scandal, he chose to remain silent. For Christiana, this was a major setback. She had risked everything, and yet Mrs. Beard was still alive. And even worse, the love of her life now suspected her of trying to murder his wife. She desperately wanted to convince him she was innocent. So she hatched a devious plan, one that would put an entire town at risk. To throw Dr. Beard off her scent, Christiana needed more victims. Some local boys were playing cards on the sidewalk in town. As Christiana walked past them, she asked them if they would like some sweets. Of course they did, so she told them that if she gave them some money, they could go into Maynard's shop and purchase anything they wanted, as long as they also purchased 6 boxes of chocolate creams for herself. Excitedly, the boys accepted the money, purchased the sweets, and returned the change and boxes of chocolate creams to Christiana, who was waiting around the corner. She thanked the boys and carried on her way back home. With the leftover strychnine from when she poisoned Mrs. Beard, she coated the chocolates with the strychnine and placed them carefully back into their boxes. Christiana walked back to Maynard's, hoping the boys were still outside playing, and they were. She approached them and claimed that they had bought the wrong chocolates, asking them to go back in and exchange them for the dark chocolate ones. The boys apologized and did as she asked, unaware they were helping her execute her plan. Mr. Maynard accepted the tainted chocolates and placed them back on his shelf to be resold to the unsuspecting public. It was a diabolical plan, and it seemed to be working. Several Brighton residents fell ill after eating the tainted sweets, and no one was making the connection between their sickness and the chocolates. However, one horrific tragedy would put Christiana at risk of being caught. On June 12, 1871, 4-year-old Sidney Barker excitedly unwrapped a chocolate from Maynard's shop. His uncle had bought them as a treat. Within minutes, he was writhing in agony. Hours later, he was dead. This was no longer a string of illnesses. Brighton was now facing a murder. The town was horrified and were now convinced that the chocolates had to be the source of the mysterious illnesses. Determined to shift the blame, Christiana came forward as a victim, claiming she too had fallen ill from Maynard's chocolates. Her performance was extremely convincing, but ultimately authorities could not find proof that Mr. Maynard was involved with the poisonings, nor that there was any foul play. So the coroner was forced to rule the death as accidental, and Mr. Maynard was exonerated of all blame. By this point, Dr. and Mrs. Beard were becoming increasingly uneasy. The death of Sidney Barker was the final straw, and fearing for their lives, the family decided to leave Brighton and move to Scotland. With Dr. Beard planning to leave Brighton, Christiana panicked. If he left, she'd lose him forever. In a desperate act, she mailed 6 poisoned cakes to prominent figures, including Mrs. Beard. To throw off suspicion, she sent one to herself. But this time, Dr. Beard had had enough. He informed the police of his long-held suspicions that Christiana was behind the poisonings. Investigators compared the handwriting on the poisoned parcel labels to Christiana's love letters, and it was a match. In August of 1871, she was arrested and charged with the murder of little Sidney Barker and the attempted murder of Mrs. Beard. During the trial, Christiana's mother testified that there was a history of mental illness in the family, hoping to paint her daughter as a troubled woman rather than a cold-blooded killer. Dr. Beard took the stand and denied any romantic involvement beyond their exchanged letters. His testimony, combined with the mounting evidence, painted a damning picture of Christiana as a woman scorned, consumed by obsession, and willing to kill to get what she wanted. In January 1872, a jury found Christiana Edmunds guilty of 4 charges, 1 count of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder, and was sentenced to death. Desperate to escape execution, Christiana falsely claimed she was pregnant, but a police doctor was quickly able to disprove that. Despite the jury's guilty verdict, the government ruled Christiana legally insane, a decision that outraged the public. Many believed she had escaped the gallows not because of her mental state, but because of her social class. Instead of execution, Christiana was sentenced to life imprisonment at Broadmoor Criminal Lunatic Asylum. She spent the rest of her days in Broadmoor, living there for over 3 decades, reportedly remaining convinced of her innocence until the end. In 1907, at age 78, she died within the asylum walls, her name fading into obscurity. Christiana Edmunds' case remains one of the most chilling poisoning sprees in Victorian history. Was she truly insane, or just a cold-blooded killer who used her privilege to escape the noose? If you found Christiana Edmunds' twisted obsession chilling, you won't want to miss the story of another shadowy figure who terrorized a town. In 1942, the people of Pascagoula, Mississippi, lived in fear of a mysterious intruder who crept into their homes at night, not to steal, but to cut their hair. A man was convicted for the crimes, but did they catch the real culprit? Some say no. Click here to uncover the bizarre mystery of the Phantom Barber of Pascagoula. Thanks for watching. If you like unpacking the past, then subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos.